Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, this is Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events and Eating at a Meeting. And I am so excited to have my friend Elisa Hays on the show today to talk about safe and inclusive food and beverage. And we're going to come at it from a different perspective today. We will talk about dietary restrictions, but we're going to talk about it in a different way. Elisa's got disabilities in a variety of different aspects, right?
Yes.
She is a certified ADA coordinator, which I am working towards getting. And she is also a certified speaking professional. And in her day job, she helps leaders build resilient teams and social conscious impact with their organizations. And I love her message and what she does, and we're going to talk about it now. So hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Just got off a retreat in Colorado Mountains, so that was nice for 3 days. So relaxed. So as I mentioned, and actually I put it in the little ad, promoting the session, I said, Elisa and I met at an event where she wasn't included, completely included because of her disabilities. And so I guess we should start off actually with what disabilities do you have? Do you want to explain that? And then explain how we met.
Sure, absolutely. It's like, how did we get to that point? So we got back just a little bit. And I'll give the very short story. If people want the long story, they can go to my website. They can stalk me online. The short story is that I had two employees in a truck pulling a trailer on a highway in Oklahoma, and we got caught in an ice storm and ended up jackknifed on a 2-lane highway. In my efforts to put the lives of my employees first, and they're alive and well today, I ended up, yes, that's fantastic. I ended up being the last person to try and evacuate the truck because we were stuck and could not move. There was oncoming traffic coming up behind us. And in the process, we were hit by a semi, then by an SUV, and then another semi truck that was going 65 miles an hour on cruise control hit my body on the run without him ever touching the brakes. Right. I know. It's unbelievable. So I was launched 90 feet through the air, impaled on a cable guardrail, my pelvis folded in half, and arrived at an emergency room with eyes fixed and dilated, no pulse, not breathing in these COVID times when I talk about, hey, yes, I have woken up from being on a ventilator. I had that experience. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, it's not fun. You don't want to be there. So because of that, and because of the injuries, they had to, during part of my hospital stay, my first hospital stay was 3.5 months long and involved 4 different hospitals. Altogether, it's taken 7 hospitals in 4 states, spanning the continent.
Wow.
My brother's kidney in order to save my life. This has been a massive collective effort. So because of that, and I had all of the gluteal muscles removed on the left-hand side. So I joke to people that I'm a half-ass speaker.
And I love that. I was telling somebody that the other day.
Right. So I can walk, but I don't walk very far. I can walk it on a good day, on a really good day. I can walk about 20 minutes. Beyond that, I use a wheelchair. So we met in 2014, the accident, or 15, we met in 15 because the accident I was in 2014. And when
Wow,
we
so
met,
it's not long after.
no, not at all. Not at all. The accident was March 1st, 2014. My kidney transplant was 18 months later to the day, September 1st, 2015. And we met in July at that conference. So at that time, I had about
Okay, we have to go back to that.
Yeah.
Really quickly. So you got impaled by a Mack truck basically 15 months before I met you.
Yes.
And you were walking when I met you.
Yes.
I mean, the short amount of time. And your mom had been told that you had a 5% chance of living. That's just amazing. Yeah. That's just amazing.
Yes. I have people who refer to me and my life, my presence as a miracle. I had a traumatic brain injury. When I got out of the hospital, I couldn't read. I couldn't remember how to cook food. I knew you cooked it. I just didn't know what to do with it. So I've had to relearn everything. And coming back, as I said, coming back from the dead is hard work. So yeah.
They make it look easy on TV.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so let's jump. We were in Washington, D.C.
Right. So at that time, I had, I believe it was 8% kidney function. I was very, very sick. I had no dialysis access ports any longer because I had them removed. I was very stubborn and vain. I wouldn't let them put a fistula in my arm. So I was actually, because I didn't have an underlying illness, I'm always very careful to tell people this, don't take this as medical advice. I didn't have an underlying illness, and I was able to stay alive through dietary controls, rigid dietary controls. What I ate mattered greatly. And in fact, too much potassium and I could have a sudden heart attack in my sleep.
Wow.
Right. So very serious deal. And I was using a wheelchair. So we met at this conference at lunch, and it was in a pretty small, too small of a room for this size of a meeting. And when I work with event planners are always trying to save money and put as many people as they can reasonably get away with in a space. And of course, with COVID, those standards are going to change. Yes. They are changing.
Yes.
But at that time, we didn't have social distancing, which turns out is a good thing for people who use wheelchairs and walkers and have like large guide dogs, that kind of thing. Instead, what they did, since the tables were all crowded pretty close together, they put this big round, what was it, a 10 top?
Yeah, 72-inch round.
Yep, there you go. Put a big round, you know your stuff. Out at the edges, the fringes of the room, took away all the chairs, stuck a sign in the middle of the table with the international handicap sign. Like, here you go. This is where the disabled people sit, out here on the fringes, and there are no other chairs where somebody could join them. So we put wheelchair people here. It was so weird. It was really weird. So there I sat in my wheelchair, because where else am I going to go? And you were so darling. You saw this, and your level of awareness and empathy, I talk about these things a lot with organizations and individuals, was just phenomenal. And I think it's because of your own experiences and expertise around this. You just have an awareness that you looked and said, well, that's weird. Why are you by yourself? That's so weird. And pulled up a chair and joined me. And we got to talking and have been friends ever since, and shared a room together at an ADA conference. And it's awesome.
Yes.
And at that conference, I also couldn't get through the buffet line. I couldn't get through the buffet line in my wheelchair. I couldn't do anything independently. We're talking about independence, July, and independence and dietary independence. I couldn't get food by myself, which is really complicated because I also had such severe dietary restrictions that without being able to get the food myself and be able, how am I going to explain to somebody like, oh, so what's your experience with kidney failure? And let me give you the list of things I can't eat.
Right.
it just doesn't work. But at that particular time and that conference, there just wasn't an awareness around that. I don't remember what the signage was like. How was the signage for you at the buffet?
I don't think it was very clear. I ended up getting a personalized plate delivered to me. I know there was soup at the end of the buffet, but kind of just watching you walk through the buffet, and I think you did get out of your wheelchair and use your cane.
I did
to do that, but there was also no one there at the buffet line, no servers there at the buffet line to help you get your food. And I think that's something really important to think about. If you do, and you should be asking about disabilities. Do you have a wheelchair or scooter, and do you need any kind of assistance? Because that's something that a server could actually help you with.
Absolutely. And if there had been somebody, because I had a cane in one hand
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to hold a plate in the other and dish up food from a buffet.
Right. With only half of your rear end.
And missing half my butt. I don't dish up food from a buffet with my rear end for the record. That would be weird.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're not stable on 2 feet is what I was trying to say.
I know. I'm
just for everyone else to understand.
It's early on the West Coast. I'm just
Yes.
So, right. So for me to stand and try and balance on my cane, all of that's a project by itself, let alone trying to balance a plate,
right?
In all seriousness, and use whatever serving utensil to try and get that done. And there was nobody there to ask what all is in this item, and how is this made? What is included in this? Because what people don't realize is the list of things that for some people with some dietary restrictions, and it would just happen to be my particular case, the list can be pretty extensive, and only people who live it 24/7 really know what that feels like. And so people will say to me, well, just get help. Well, that's more complicated. I need somebody standing there that I personally can ask questions of.
Right. Yep. And servers get busy, and actually when we come back to from COVID, when we start meeting again, I think the number of staff are going to be a lot more limited, because a lot have been furloughed, and bringing them back, because hotels don't want to have, or don't have the capacity to bring everybody back when they don't have the events to staff them for. Right. So it's going to be a big balance that we're going to have to do. But I think being upfront and figuring out this labeling and service methods for individuals with disabilities, whether it's food allergies or physical disabilities, is something that we really do need to pay attention to, even more importantly now.
Absolutely. And so as we're talking about independence, and we're talking about coming back from COVID and coming back to live meetings, the other part of this equation is not only do I use a wheelchair, and I now also have a service dog. She's a little 12-pound dog that sits in my lap. She's adorable. Her name is Belle. And she's like my favorite thing to put on Instagram. It's just pictures of my dog. So not only are there those aspects, and in many ways COVID will actually help with the amount of space to get around, but the other piece of that is, because of my having a kidney transplant, I now take immunosuppressive medications, that's anti-rejection meds for organ transplant recipients, which is thousands of people. Intentionally lowers your immune system, puts you at much higher risk. So, and I'm just one of tens of thousands of people in the country who are at high risk. And as we come back, having the issue of having servers and engaging with people, it becomes an issue of independence and accessibility when things like mask use is done properly, and is done, and taking those things incredibly seriously. As part of coming back is, and as I talk with my clients, you have to communicate these things super clearly, really well, of how well you're going to do this, so that people, the tens of thousands of people like me, will feel safe enough to come back.
Right. And it reminds me, I did an event, and I think I've told this story before, but I did an event at a Hyatt in Austin a long time ago, and we were the third group coming in, I think, after it was originally opened. And the group in front of us was Association of Visually Impaired. Mm-hmm. And someone joked that, oh, well, they don't need to have the hotel ready for them because they can't see it.
Oh,
and what reminded me of it is what you just said, is that we actually have to be even more prepared for those individuals who have disabilities, because we have to make sure that the pathways are clear and the access is good. And, you know, and with buffets for the visually impaired, you have to set up the eggs in the same place, in the same shaping dish location every single day, so that they know what what's in each one of those, and let them know in advance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the visually impaired, or people who have visual impairments, people with blindness, they have to touch their world so much. They move through the world in a tactile way, which in COVID is incredibly dangerous. And again, they're not safe coming back if the strict adherence to these health protocols, which honestly we should be doing anyway. I mean, really, we should have been doing this a long time ago. Flu season by itself is a problem. Yes. So that these things have to be done and have to be communicated really well in advance, communicated in an accessible way. In other words, if you post a video about how great your efforts at cleaning are, but you don't make that video accessible to people who are blind or visually impaired, for example, with great visual descriptions, then they're not going to know, and they're not going to feel safe coming back.
Yep, very true. And that's having sound, that's having subscripts or closed captions at the bottom of your videos. All of
the hearing impaired.
Yes. And I think I sent you a link the other day about a gentleman who was creating masks.
Right.
Because he reads lips, and he actually got a hearing aid like right after this happened, after he started making masks. But he made masks with the clear piece in the front of it, plastic in the front of it,
right,
so that he could give those out to individuals who were speaking with him to say, I need to read your lips so I can hear you.
Right, which is fantastic. And and with hearing impaired, and again, as part of that communicating in advance of people, here are all the precautions that we are going to take for you. You need to communicate to the hearing impaired how good your signage is going to be.
Okay.
So that, for example, at a buffet line, so that for safety reasons, if we're distancing people, and somebody who is hearing impaired and their independence depends upon them being able to access information on their own,
right,
without needing to have somebody close up. Part of my independence is my ability to serve up my own food going through with my wheelchair, for example, without having other people handling any kind of serving utensils. Now, under COVID, buffets are probably going to be handled considerably differently, but and that's your expertise. That one's not mine.
They're pretty much gone away for a while.
Right. But how we serve food, how we communicate is so often people with disabilities aren't factored into that, because people forget that 1 in 5 people in the country has a disability.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah. That's 20% of your attendees.
Right. 20% of any given community has disabilities, and people forget that these disabilities can be unseen. For example, people with MS, again, are people at high risk, so they care greatly about the levels of response,
right,
to COVID, how these things are being handled with the rooms, the service, the setup, how various touch surfaces are being handled, how distancing is being handled, and masks and all of that, because they are also at high risk. So it's so important, this communication, the actually doing it, for one thing, and then communicating in advance how you're going to do it.
Now, have you seen any events that have done a really good job of communicating that information, not counting COVID, but beforehand, saying what they're doing? Are there events that we could look at that do a good job of this, or is everybody still in a learning curve on that as well?
I have to be honest, not really.
Yeah.
It's the truth of it is that, so we have the 30-year anniversary of the ADA is on the 26th of July.
Okay.
Which is fantastic. But the ADA is civil rights legislation. It wasn't until 2010 that, which is actually really published and widely available in 2011. So in other words, very new, that the Department of Justice came out with their exhaustive list of criteria that we're used to seeing. Here's how the rise to run ratio on building a ramp, that sort of issue. So because the ADA itself 30 years ago didn't include that information, and the ADA, of course, didn't include information about websites or any of the digital communication.
Because it didn't exist.
It didn't exist, right. So that kind of information that should be available on websites and through digital communication, which is mostly what we do, especially now,
right?
That kind of information, people didn't have a vision for it. So if I'm going to be super pithy, I could say 2020 is the time to have your disability vision. And
it's a good thing. Get 2020. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there is a lot of room for growth and improvement in this area. And the biggest problem is that this information is so often communicated from a compliance mindset, not from a customer service mindset. It is it is also communicated placing the onus upon the person with the disabilities, just like so often with food allergies and things. The onus is upon the person who has that as an obstacle to make sure that they ask, they communicate, they follow up. Is this being done? As opposed to the communication coming the other way around. So everything we know about good customer service is not done for people who have special needs.
Well, and that reminds me of two stories. A hotel general manager said to me, she's like, I was giving a presentation to a group of general managers, and she's like, yeah, that they can figure it out on their own, and I mean, this was like 2 years ago. And I'm like, I wanted to like jump over the table and like, no, but then, another person just a couple of weeks ago said, yeah, they're used to, not having options to eat at events. And so it's okay. And I'm like, it's not okay. I mean, if I'm paying the same amount of money as Elisa is, and you're feeding me, then I should have something to eat.
Well, we had a circumstance like that at the conference where we shared a room.
Yes, we did. Oh my God, you helped me so much because I was so upset.
And I felt really bad for you. I think you should explain what happened.
So we were going in this, to be honest with you, we were going through a training around the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'm like, okay. And I have done my due diligence. I've called multiple ADA offices and said, this does fall under here, right? And they're like, yes, it does. But when I come to this conference, they didn't ask about dietary needs. They didn't give me a meal card of any sort to get to the staff. And so I'm going through the buffet, and that event, there was one woman standing there, but nothing was labeled. And she's like, and I'm like, I can't eat any of this. And I got so frustrated, and I walked away. And you're like, nope, this is what you do. You're going to go back and you're going to stand tall and you're going to say, I need something to eat.
Right. You are not going hungry. This is
right.
Not okay.
Exactly. And so I did, and we ended up getting the banquet captain and the event manager there to bring me some chicken and broccoli. And so I did eat, but it's just frustrating but it's frustrating that the organization that was hosting it didn't even realize that aspect of it in what they were communicating as well. So when you were saying there's still a lot to learn, everybody, even the people giving ADA conferences, have a lot to learn about it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and part of it falls down to people placing the level of responsibility on someone else. Because you've got meeting planners who will put the responsibility on the food and beverage director, food and beverage manager at the hotel. Put it on the sales manager, the food and beverage manager of that event. And see, in full disclosure, I used to work behind the scenes with the food and beverage director and the sales director of a major hotel. I was their assistant. So that's why so often I'll walk into the back of house of a hotel and go, excuse me, I'm going to need the F&B manager on duty.
Yeah.
They look at me
can't do that anymore, but yes.
Right. I know. It's who are you? But so the meeting planners who are the customer of the convention hotel, let's use that type of property as an example. They will, in all of their busyness to plan their meetings, who are our speakers, what are our events, what everything else, they pick out a menu and then they place all the responsibility for everything else over on the property managers, property owners. The property is placing the onus on their customer, who is the meeting planner in that event, saying, well, they'll tell us what they need. And what ends up falling through the cracks is people like you, people like me, who have other needs and nobody's asking, which is what puts us in the position of having to be these strong advocates for ourselves. And just not everybody is comfortable speaking up like that. And you end up just losing people who will say, you know what, this is too much trouble. This is uncomfortable for me. This feels awkward.
Yeah.
Right. And they'll walk away. They'll have a bad experience or they'll roll away, as the case may be.
Yes.
And they won't want to come back, which is now more than ever. We want 100% of the people who we are including in our events to love it.
So true. I mean, because we're wanting to bring people, we so want to get back to meeting, and we need to make sure that everybody that does come stays and wants to come back.
Absolutely.
Because then they're going to communicate it out. You know, good news spreads faster. Well, I don't know. Let's hope it spreads faster than bad news.
Well, these days, good news spreads really fast because people are excited to hear it.
That's true. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing people don't realize is you can have 100% of the people attending the event be like, wow, I had great food. It was so easy to get the information that I need. I had great accessibility. All of these questions were asked so that all I had to do was answer the questions, and then somebody actually followed up and provided with what I need. So you can do that. And if you do effective PR and communication in advance about the event and how you handle that, you can attract even more people, because so often people with disabilities haven't gone or been engaged in events. I work with a lot of live events, fairs, festivals, that type of event, all canceled, and they don't go. One of the things I've talked about is you think, oh, well, none of those people really come, and those who do, they rent a wheelchair. And all they're thinking of, much like COVID, is the old people. Which isn't true, which isn't at all true, because what people don't realize is that people with disabilities are not those poor people. There's that othering mentality, and that mentality of here's these people we have to take care of because they're those poor people. Instead, no, people working age, people with disabilities have more spending power. They actually have more disposable income than the African American community and the Hispanic communities combined.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
That's huge.
It's a 2018 research report. And if you want to dig through the data, the links are on my website. But it is so true. People are literally leaving money on the table by not appealing to people with disabilities.
Well, and I don't know, I'm going to say the number wrong, maybe, but food allergy families, it's a $25 million. They spend an additional $25,000 a year to feed their families. And so think about that too. I mean, if they're not coming to your event because nothing is labeled and nothing is communicated, what's that market? And there's 32 million people in the US that have food allergies. So, and 27 million of them are adults. so they're coming to these events. And so if you want them to come too, it makes it such an opportunity for clear communication and an inclusive, independent experience.
Absolutely. And independence is dignity.
Right.
It's really, independence is, well, it's great to talk about independence in July, because it's the 4th of July. But it's so important that people be able to go to events, whether it is conferences, live events, whatever the type of meeting is, or just business meetings in a corporation. It is so important that people be able to go and feel like they can function independently. They look better professionally if people are there at a professional event. It makes them look better. And if you don't provide this for them, the level of discrimination, the popular term, the microaggression that happens, is that you are unwittingly putting someone in a position of not looking like they have the independence to be in a higher position within an organization, for example.
That makes sense.
Right. But you're infinite. I can't even pronounce the word. How do you say that? Infantilizing,
Yeah. Okay. Making them feel small.
Like children.
Or childlike. Yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the biggest frustrations of people with disabilities, for example, wheelchair users, because I became disabled at 46 years old. So I honestly, it's embarrassing to admit, but I thought stories like this were exaggerated by I'm going to use a horrible term. Don't anybody ever say this, but I get to say it, is that angry cripple stereotype. And I have to honestly confess, that's what I thought was going on, until I had over and over and over total strangers push my wheelchair around without asking me. And people, quote unquote, helping me without asking, which puts me in this horrible, awkward, dependent, childlike position. And that happens when we put people in the position of having to ask and advocate all the time, or just simply not being able to get what you need.
Right. And that, it's demoralizing.
Yes.
And you and it's frustrating, and it makes it so hard to feel like that you are there. And I was telling the story this weekend of when I first found out about my dietary restrictions, 2003. So this was 2004. And my boss, we were having a staff party and there was cake, and she's like, just eat the damn cake. And I'm like, and I can't. And, going back a couple of years, we were at a funeral, and she tells me that her daughter, who's now grown, is a vegetarian or vegan. And so she now kind of gets where I was coming from, but it took, 10 years or so for that to realize that. And I don't even know if she remembers saying that to me, but she does recognize that I had a dietary need. And which is refreshing, but it's still that, hey, just eat the damn cake, or just get your own food, or, get yourself to that room. Because I also think that event that we met, didn't you have to go down 2 elevators into the back of the house even to get to that space?
Oh, absolutely. And this is a flaw in the design that I've seen in so many places, where I had to go some weird back alleys, had to be directed by hotel staff just to be able to find the elevator. So while everybody else would head up a set of stairs to go to meetings, by the time I got to the breakout sessions, you're a third of the way in. Because I have to go so far, and I'm in a wheelchair pushing it across thick hotel carpet, which is very hard to do, and it's exhausting. So then when you are having to overexert yourself, you're not getting the kind of food that your body needs. Now you're exhausted, your energy's depleted, so you can't participate in a way that is beneficial to you and beneficial to everybody else at the meeting. Right.
And at that point, probably if it's third of the way through, and if the room is packed, you can't even get into the room.
Oh, absolutely. I have watched more sessions from the doorway.
That's just Blows my mind. Yeah.
Well, and what you were saying about demoralizing brought up a thought for me that I really would like to address. So part of what people don't realize is that demoralizing aspect can be incredibly activating for people who have the invisible disabilities of mental disabilities, people with severe anxiety and PTSD and all these things that I really didn't understand until I was hit by a semi, and no great surprise, it left me with PTSD. And so then I have had times where I've had to deal with and personally experience and face what severe anxiety feels like, and that type of response. And all you want to do is run and hide. So when you put somebody in a demoralizing situation, or if somebody has an invisible disability of high anxiety, and quite frankly, when you've got a disability going into any public setting, there's a level of anxiety anyway, because your mind, if you haven't gotten all the answers in advance beforehand, which you typically, if you have disabilities, you try to do all this work in advance.
Right.
But if you don't have answers to all of your questions, there's that part in your mind that's going, okay, am I going to be able to get what I need? Should I be packing snacks in my purse, which I'm sure you do anyway. Yep. But, and your brain is already working at that level of protecting self.
Right.
So then to essentially reinforce that, yep, you are more vulnerable. Yep, you are more unseen. Yep, you are less valued, is activating to that kind of anxiety, which makes people want to run and hide.
Yeah. And that anxiety too, it just reminded me of a conversation on food allergies. I'm like, because you're going through the buffet and you could die if you eat something, I mean, there's countless stories that I have of, people asking waiters, does that have any nuts in it? No. And then there's shaved hazelnuts on top of the cheesecake. And, 10 minutes later, they're in the ambulance to go to the hospital. I mean, and so the anxiety, all the pre-work that we have to do to get to an event, it doesn't match. I'm a meeting planner too. It doesn't match all the stuff that we have to do. And we are asking you add more to your plate, but you're going to create a better experience that's going to, like you said, bring more people in the end and help somebody enjoy that event and get more out of it than they probably thought they would.
Right. It's part of it is understanding what the value is, because to hear all of this as a meeting planner is exhausting. You're like, but great. Because what I was doing? I was sitting around with an extra couple of hours in my day and nothing to do. I was wondering how I would fill that time. Right. That's not happening to anybody with anything.
No.
So the value of that is that you bring more people, you increase revenue because you can attract more people, you can keep more people. As we all know, it's easier to keep a customer than get a new one.
Right.
And if your customers, for example, if it's an association meeting, your customers are all the people who are coming to the association meeting. I've been on that side of the table too. And you work really hard to try and attract those registrations. But if people are like, oh my gosh, I went last year and it was so much work, it was exhausting, and it really wasn't worth the money, then people aren't going to register. So there's that value of being inclusive, but there's also the issue that inclusion now is such a hot topic that by being visibly inclusive as an organization, you're just more relevant. So you don't look outdated. You look like, hey, we are paying attention to what the current trends are, which is the type of impression you want people to have.
Right. Yeah. And as we get back to doing all of this, I think that has so much extra value to it as well, because you're going to say, and this is the time to look at, who is our market and who are we missing? And I was at a writer's retreat this weekend, and, listening to the 6 other women, we all had input for each one of them from a variety of different perspectives. So I think getting you or I on a committee with some planners, or, inviting people who have disabilities to help you plan or think through some of your planning is very, very valuable, because you're bringing that different perspective.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that because I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed
Right.
And it is a lot of information. And that's why bringing in outside help, people who that's what they study, that's what they do, that's what they live, can make an enormous difference, because it's just a lot to know. And that brings some peace of mind to it. For people who aren't yet ready to loop in somebody else, then they want to be thinking about primarily just beginning first with communicating. Because I believe that if people start by thinking, okay, how am I going to communicate this information? How am I going to communicate this information? It'll bring up questions for them. They'll say, oh, we were going to put that sign out with the food, but now I'm thinking, wait a second, what food are we serving there? And do you know how much dairy is in all of this? Maybe we need to make some adjustments.
Right.
It'll just increase. If you start with the communication aspect of it, it'll raise questions in your own mind that if you don't have the answers to, you can reach out to somebody like you, like me, like somebody in the community. You can contact your regional ADA center, which are all over the country. Those are part of federal organizations, and ask those questions. They're not experts in meetings and events. That's a different subject. So, and I think part of why you and I just we have so much fun getting along and just grew, because we both do that, meetings, events, that we get that, and we get that inclusion aspect of it.
Right. Yeah. And we want a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Literally. Yes.
Literally want to see.
Yep. We want to be able to roll our seat up and not sit alone.
Right.
Yes. And we want to have something to eat, to enjoy, break bread with, even though I can't have bread. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So we are at 41 minutes. I'm so excited we talked. I just posted up there and I've tagged it. So elisahays.com, right?
Yes.
And what are your social media? Where can they find you on social media?
I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. I have a Facebook page, Elisa Hays, CSP. That stands for Certified Speaking Professional. And then on LinkedIn, you can look me up by name. On Twitter, I think it's hi. Oh, that's what it is. It's hi_Elisa Hays.
Okay. Awesome. Fantastic. Is there anything that you want to, departing wisdom that you want to give everyone?
I think that I would just want everyone to be kind, to be gentle. When I got out of the hospital, we're all going through major trauma right now. And the biggest thing that I noticed after I got out of the hospital, and so much trauma, and I've had a lot more since then, over 20 major surgeries. All I really wanted was kindness, because when you've got so much already going on, you just want people to be kind. And I think that for meeting planners, and when thinking about issues of trying to be accessible to people with disabilities, people with special dietary needs, you want to remember that it's not a burden to be kind.
Love that. And we're going to end on that. Thank you so much, Elisa. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.